The clock on the mantel ticked over to 2 a.m., its chime faint against the rhythmic crash of the waves outside the Miami Beach house. Moonlight poured through the tall windows, bathing the sleek marble floors in silver. As usual, Maria hadn't planned to be home this late. Her charity gala had dragged on longer than expected, and she wasn't one to leave before the spotlight dimmed. Stepping out of her stilettos, Maria sighed. The house was silent. Her daughter Eliana and son-in-law Ethan must have been asleep hours ago. The stillness felt unnervingly heavy, until a faint sound broke it, the hiss of running water. Maria froze. The hairs on her arms prickled. At this hour? She grabbed her phone and the heavy flashlight from the kitchen drawer. Robberies weren't unheard of in this part of Miami, even in gated communities. Quietly, she padded toward the sound. The bathroom door was ajar, steam curling out like ghostly fingers. Maria pushed the door open wider and aimed the flashlight beam inside. Ethan stood there, his back to her, toweling off his broad shoulders. Droplets of water trickled down his sculpted frame, glistening in the harsh light. "Ethan?" Maria blurted, lowering the flashlight a fraction. He jumped, clutching the towel around his waist as he turned. "Maria, what the hell?" I thought someone broke in," Maria stammered, her face flushing even as her eyes lingered involuntarily on his chest. Ethan exhaled sharply, his hand raking through his damp hair. "It's just me. Late-night swim," he muttered, his tone uneasy. Maria chuckled nervously, still clutching the flashlight like a weapon. "Well, you've clearly been keeping up with the gym." Ethan laughed awkwardly. Thanks, I guess." Her lips curved into a sly smile, the remnants of her wine-fueled gala evening emboldening her. "Eliana's lucky," she murmured, more to herself than him. Ethan's posture stiffened, and an awkward silence enveloped the room. Maria cleared her throat and stepped back. "Well, good night, Ethan. Sorry to, interrupt." Without waiting for his reply, she turned and hurried out of the bathroom, her heart pounding in a way it hadn't in years. A week later, Eliana sat at the breakfast bar, scrolling through her phone while Ethan sipped his coffee. Maria strolled in, her silk robe trailing behind her. "Morning, darlings," she cooed, planting a kiss on her daughter's head. "Morning, Mom," Eliana replied absently, her focus still on her screen. Maria reached for the coffee pot, her eyes flicking to Ethan. He looked away quickly, but not before she caught a flash of unease in his expression. The silence stretched uncomfortably until Eliana broke it. "Hey, Mom, did you happen to grab my spare house key from the drawer?" Maria paused, the coffee cup halfway to her lips. "Key?" "Yeah," Eliana said, frowning. "The one we keep in the kitchen. It's gone. I thought maybe you borrowed it." Maria shook her head, feigning confusion. "No, darling. I haven't touched it." Ethan coughed into his coffee, earning a glance from Eliana. "You okay?" "Yeah," he said quickly, setting the mug down. I need to grab my laptop." "Excuse me." As Ethan left the room, Maria's mind raced. She had seen the key last week when she'd... No, that couldn't be right. But a creeping sensation settled in her chest, a mix of guilt and exhilaration. "Something wrong, Mom?" Eliana asked, snapping her out of her thoughts. Maria forced a smile. "Of course not, darling. Just a little tired. Late nights at my age, you know." The revelation later that night, Maria couldn't sleep. The memory of that key gnawed at her, dragging her thoughts to darker places. She had to know. She crept down to the kitchen, careful not to wake anyone. Rummaging through the drawer where the key had been kept, she found nothing. The cold, empty space seemed to mock her. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. "We need to talk. You know where." Maria's heart stopped. "Ethan." She stared at the screen, her pulse roaring in her ears. The weight of the past week's events, the glances, the silences, the unspoken tension, pressed down on her. Against her better judgment, she typed back, 10 p.m. tomorrow. Same place. As the clock ticked closer to 10 p.m. the following night, Maria found herself at a private cabana by the beach, a secluded spot Ethan had once shown her during a family barbecue. The waves lapped softly against the shore, and the moon cast a silver glow over the sand. Ethan was already there, pacing. When he saw her, he stopped, his expression torn between guilt and desperation. "This has to stop," he said as soon as she approached. Maria crossed her arms, masking her nerves with a cool facade. "What are you talking about?" "You know exactly what I'm talking about," Ethan said, his voice strained. "Last week, the bathroom, everything since. It's too much. Eliana will figure it out." Maria arched an eyebrow. "Figure what out, Ethan? That you're scared of your own shadow?" His jaw clenched. "That we can't keep pretending nothing happened." Maria took a step closer, her voice dropping. "You think I'm pretending? You think I don't replay every second of that night in my mind?" Ethan looked away, his hands balling into fists. "It was a mistake." Maria's laughter was low and bitter. "Funny how you didn't seem to think so at the time." "I didn't," Ethan started, but Maria cut him off, her tone sharp. "Save it. You're not the first man to crave something forbidden, Ethan. But you're the first to get cold feet so quickly." Ethan's face twisted in anguish. "This isn't a game, Maria. This is my marriage. This is Eliana." "And what about me?" Maria shot back, her voice cracking. "Do I just go on pretending I don't exist? That I don't feel anything?" Ethan looked at her then, truly looked at her, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The tension between them was a live wire, sparking with unspoken desires and regrets. "Maria," he whispered, his voice heavy with everything he couldn't say. But whatever he was about to add was cut short by the sudden, unmistakable sound of footsteps. Both of them turned toward the source, their hearts pounding. "Eliana?" Maria breathed, dread pooling in her stomach. The figure stepped into the moonlight, and Maria's blood ran cold. The figure stepped into the moonlight, her features clear under the pale glow. It wasn't Eliana. It was their neighbor, Karen, a woman notorious for her nosy nature and love for spreading rumors. Her arms were crossed, her expression a mix of curiosity and judgment. "Am I interrupting something?" Karen's voice was syrupy sweet, but the undertone was razor sharp. Maria and Ethan froze, the tension between them almost palpable. "Karen," Maria said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "What brings you out here at this hour?" Karen tilted her head, her smile widening. "Oh, just a midnight stroll. Funny thing, though, I could have sworn I heard voices. Thought it might be interesting to see who was out here." Ethan cleared his throat, stepping back toward the shadows. "We were just talking." "Talking," Karen repeated, drawing out the word. Her gaze flicked between them, sharp as a hawk's. "Well, I'll leave you to it. But you know how people love to talk around here." Maria forced a smile, her nails digging into her palms. "Good night, Karen." Karen's laughter drifted behind her as she walked away, the sound chilling in the quiet night. As soon as Karen was out of sight, Ethan turned to Maria, panic etched on his face. "She's going to tell everyone." "Let her," Maria said, though her heart raced at the thought. "What?" Ethan's voice rose. "Are you insane? If this gets back to Eliana," Maria's eyes flashed. "Do you think she'd believe a word Karen says? The woman thrives on lies and gossip. She's a mosquito, Ethan. Don't let her bite you." But Ethan wasn't convinced. "This isn't a joke, Maria. If Eliana even suspects something, she won't," Maria interrupted, her voice firm. "As long as you keep your head." Ethan exhaled shakily, running a hand through his hair. "I shouldn't have come tonight." Maria's expression softened, but she didn't reach for him. "But you did. And now you need to decide what you're going to do." Ethan stared at her, his emotions warring on his face. Without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving Maria alone under the moonlight. Cracks began to show the next morning. Maria found herself at the breakfast table again, trying to appear unbothered as Eliana hummed in the kitchen. Ethan sat across from her, his eyes firmly on his plate. Eliana, Maria began, forcing a smile. What are your plans for the day? Oh, just running errands, Eliana replied, pouring herself coffee. I might stop by Karen's place, actually. She mentioned something about a new garden project. Maria's grip on her mug tightened imperceptibly. Karen? Yeah, Eliana said, sitting down. You know how she gets. She's always full of ideas. Full of something, Maria muttered under her breath. What was that, Mom? Nothing, darling. Maria sipped her coffee, her mind racing. Ethan's fork clattered against his plate, drawing both women's attention. Sorry, he mumbled, pushing back from the table. I just remembered I have a meeting. On a Saturday? Eliana asked, frowning. Yeah, last-minute thing, Ethan said quickly, grabbing his phone and keys. I'll see you later. As the door closed behind him, Eliana turned to her mother, her brow furrowed. He's been so off lately. Do you think something's wrong? Maria forced a sympathetic smile. I'm sure it's just work stress. You know how demanding his job can be. Eliana sighed, her worry evident. I guess. I wish he'd talk to me. Maria reached across the table, placing a hand over her daughter's. Give him time, darling. Men aren't always the best at opening up. Eliana nodded, though her expression remained troubled. A whisper in the wind later that afternoon, Maria decided to pay Karen a visit. She found her neighbor in the backyard, pruning a rose bush. Maria, Karen greeted her with feigned warmth. What a surprise. I thought we should chat, Maria said, her tone light but her eyes hard. About last night. Karen raised an eyebrow, her smirk growing. What about it? Let's not play games, Maria said, stepping closer. I know you're already thinking of ways to twist what you saw. So let me make this clear. If you spread even a whisper of gossip, you'll regret it. Karen laughed, the sound dry and mocking. And how exactly are you going to stop me? Maria leaned in, her voice dropping to a deadly whisper. You forget, Karen, that I know all your secrets. Shall I start with your husband's weekend, fishing trips, or the money missing from the PDA fund? Karen's smirk faltered, her grip on the shears tightening. That's what I thought, Maria said, straightening. Keep your mouth shut, and I'll keep yours shut too. Without waiting for a reply, Maria turned and walked away, leaving Karen fuming silently behind her. The key that evening, as Maria settled into the living room with a glass of wine, Eliana walked in holding something small and shiny between her fingers. Mom, Eliana said, her voice hesitant, I found this in your bag. Maria's heart stopped. It was the spare house key. Eliana, she began, trying to keep her voice calm. I can explain. Why do you have this? Eliana asked, her tone more confused than accusatory. Maria hesitated, her mind scrambling for an excuse. I borrowed it last week when I stayed out late. I must have forgotten to return it. Eliana frowned, but she seemed to accept the explanation. You should have told me. I was starting to think I'd lost it. Maria forced a laugh. Silly me. I'll put it back right away. But as Eliana walked away, Maria's hands trembled. The facade she had worked so hard to maintain was beginning to crack, and she wasn't sure how much longer she could hold it together. Maria couldn't shake the unease that settled over her after Eliana's discovery of the spare key. It was a small detail, easily explained, yet it felt like a crack in a dam threatening to burst. As the week wore on, Maria noticed Eliana watching her more closely, her questions about Ethan's behavior becoming more frequent. The once easy flow of their conversations now carried an undercurrent of suspicion. A chance encounter. It was mid-morning when Maria decided she needed to clear her head. She drove down to the boardwalk near the beach house, hoping the sound of the waves would quiet her racing thoughts. As she parked her car and stepped onto the wooden planks, her eyes landed on a figure she recognized immediately, Ethan. He was sitting at an outdoor cafe, his head bowed as he spoke into his phone. Maria's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure if it was guilt or anger, but something compelled her to approach him. "Ethan," she said, her voice cutting through the noise of the cafe. He looked up, startled, quickly ending his call. "Maria? What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," she said, sliding into the seat across from him. Ethan glanced around nervously. "I needed some air. Things have been tense at home." Maria leaned in, her voice low. "And whose fault is that, Ethan?" His jaw tightened. "Don't start, Maria. I've had enough of this." "Oh, I'm sure you have," Maria said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "But don't think for a second that I'll let you pin this on me. You're the one who let things spiral out of control." Ethan leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "You think I wanted this? You're the one who couldn't leave well enough alone." The tension between them crackled, drawing the attention of a few nearby patrons. Maria forced herself to lean back, plastering a calm smile on her face. "Relax, Ethan," she said softly. "We wouldn't want anyone getting the wrong idea, now would we?" Ethan stared at her for a moment before shaking his head. "You're impossible." "And you're predictable," Maria shot back. Ethan stood abruptly, throwing a few bills onto the table. "This was a mistake." "Most things are," Maria called after him, her voice sweet but laced with venom. Eliana's growing doubts that evening, Eliana cornered Ethan in the kitchen as he prepared dinner. "You've been so distant lately," she said, her voice heavy with concern. "What's going on with you?" Ethan paused, gripping the edge of the counter. "It's just work, Eliana. Things have been crazy." Eliana folded her arms. "Is it really just work? Or is there something else you're not telling me?" Ethan turned to face her, his expression tired. "I'm not hiding anything, Eliana. You're imagining things." Eliana's eyes narrowed. "Am I? Because Karen stopped by today, and she mentioned seeing you and my mother talking at the beach last week." Ethan's face paled. "Karen needs to mind her own business." "That's not an answer," Eliana pressed. "There's nothing to answer," Ethan snapped, his voice rising. "Your mother and I ran into each other, that's all. It's not a big deal." But Eliana wasn't convinced. "Ethan, if there's something going on—" "There isn't," Ethan interrupted, his tone final. "Drop it, Eliana." Eliana flinched at his harsh tone, but she didn't back down. "Fine. But if I find out you're lying to me, Ethan, I swear—" "I'm not lying," Ethan said firmly, though his voice lacked conviction. Maria's risky move the next day. Maria found herself pacing the living room, her mind racing. She couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were closing in. If Eliana dug too deep, it would all unravel. She reached for her phone and dialed Ethan's number. "What do you want?" he answered, his tone clipped. "We need to talk," Maria said. "We don't need to do anything," Ethan replied. "This is over, Maria." "You keep telling yourself that," Maria said coolly, "but we both know it's not true. Meet me at the cabana tonight. We need to figure out how to handle this." Ethan sighed heavily. "Fine, but this is the last time." The revelation as the sun set, Maria waited at the cabana, her nerves frayed. When Ethan arrived, he looked as though he hadn't slept in days. "This is a bad idea," he said as he approached her. "It's the only idea we have," Maria replied. Before either of them could say more, the sound of footsteps made them both turn. Eliana stood a few feet away, her face pale and her eyes wide with shock. "I knew it," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I knew something was going on." "Eliana," Ethan began, stepping toward her, but she held up a hand to stop him. "Don't," she said, her voice breaking. "Don't you dare try to explain." "Eliana, it's not what it looks like," Maria said, her calm demeanor finally cracking. "It's exactly what it looks like," Eliana spat, tears streaming down her face. "You've been lying to me. Both of you." "Eliana, please," Ethan begged, his voice desperate, but she shook her head, backing away. "I can't believe I trusted either of you." With that, she turned and ran, leaving Maria and Ethan standing in stunned silence. The cabana stood silent, the sound of the waves crashing against the shore the only reminder of the world outside. Maria and Ethan remained frozen, their minds racing to process what had just happened. "She knows," Ethan said hoarsely, breaking the silence. Maria's composure wavered, her calm facade cracking at last. "Of course she knows. Do you think she's blind, Ethan? She caught us." "This is your fault," Ethan snapped, his anger finally surfacing. "You couldn't leave well enough alone." "My fault?" Maria shot back, her voice rising. "Don't you dare try to pin this on me. You weren't exactly innocent in all of this." Ethan clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. "We should have stopped this weeks ago." "But we didn't," Maria said, her voice dropping to a deadly calm. "And now we have to deal with the consequences." "What consequences, Maria? What are you planning to do?" Maria's eyes narrowed. "Whatever it takes to control this mess." Eliana's confrontation. Eliana didn't stop running until she reached the beach house. Bursting through the door, she slammed it shut behind her, leaning against it as her chest heaved with sobs. Her mind was a whirlwind of emotions: betrayal, anger, despair. How could her own mother and husband do this to her? Minutes later, the sound of tires crunching on gravel pulled her attention. She wiped her face and straightened, her heart pounding as the door opened. Maria stepped inside, her expression carefully composed. "Eliana, we need to talk." "There's nothing to talk about," Eliana said, her voice shaking. "I saw you. Both of you." "Eliana, please," Maria said, stepping closer. "You've misunderstood. Don't." Eliana shouted, cutting her off. "Don't you dare try to lie to me again. I trusted you, Mom. I trusted him. And you betrayed me." "Eliana, listen to me," Maria said, her voice softening. "I never meant for this to happen." "Oh, so it just happened?" Eliana said bitterly. "That's your excuse?" Maria's composure slipped, and she sighed heavily. "I made a mistake. We both did. But don't let this ruin your life, Eliana." "My life?" Eliana laughed bitterly, tears streaming down her face. "What life? The one you just destroyed?" Maria's eyes flashed with frustration. "You think I'm the villain here, but maybe you should ask Ethan why he came to me in the first place." "What are you talking about?" Eliana demanded, her anger shifting to confusion. Maria's lips curled into a faint, bitter smile. "You weren't the only one feeling neglected, darling." Eliana's stomach churned, the implications of her mother's words hitting her like a physical blow. "You're blaming me?" "No," Maria said quickly. "I'm just saying there's more to this than you realize." Eliana stared at her mother, her mind spinning. "Get out," she said finally, her voice cold. "Excuse me?" Maria said, stunned. "Get out of my house," Eliana repeated, her tone firmer. "Now." Maria opened her mouth to protest but thought better of it. Without another word, she turned and left, the door clicking shut behind her. Ethan's desperation. Ethan arrived at the beach house not long after Maria had left. He found Eliana sitting on the couch, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "Eliana," he began, stepping cautiously into the room. "Don't," she said, her voice flat. "Please, let me explain," Ethan pleaded. Eliana looked at him, her expression a mix of heartbreak and fury. "Explain? What could you possibly say that would make this better?" "I was weak," Ethan admitted, his voice cracking. "I made a mistake, a horrible, unforgivable mistake. But I never stopped loving you, Eliana. Never." Eliana laughed bitterly, shaking her head. "Do you even hear yourself? You betrayed me. With my mother. And now you want me to believe you love me?" "I do love you," Ethan insisted, stepping closer. "What happened with Maria it was a mistake. I was confused and she what?" Eliana interrupted. "She seduced you? Is that the excuse you're going with?" "I don't know," Ethan admitted, his shoulders slumping. "All I know is that I regret it. Every second of it." Eliana stood, her fists clenched at her sides. You don't get to play the victim, Ethan. Not after what you've done. Please, Eliana, Ethan begged, his voice barely above a whisper. Give me a chance to make this right. Eliana's eyes filled with fresh tears, but her expression remained steely. Get out. Ethan hesitated, his heart breaking. Eliana, out, she screamed, her voice raw with emotion. Ethan flinched, then turned and walked out the door, leaving Eliana alone once more. A plan in motion. Maria sat in her car, her hands gripping the steering wheel as she stared out at the darkened street. Her mind raced with possibilities, each one more desperate than the last. She couldn't lose control now, not after everything she had done to maintain her carefully crafted life. Reaching for her phone, she dialed a number. Karen, she said when the line connected. We need to talk. Eliana's revelation. The next morning, Eliana woke to find an envelope slid under her bedroom door. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a handwritten note. There's more to this than you know. Meet me at the cabana at midnight. K. Eliana's hands trembled as she read the note. Was this another betrayal? Or was it a chance to uncover the full truth? As midnight approached, she made her way to the cabana, her heart pounding. Karen was already there, her expression tense. I thought you deserved to know the truth, Karen began, holding out a folder. Eliana opened it, her eyes scanning the contents. Photos, receipts, and messages, all pointing to something far more sinister than she had imagined. This wasn't just an affair, Karen said softly. Your mother. She's been planning this for a long time. Eliana's breath caught in her throat as the full weight of the betrayal sank in. The folder trembled in Eliana's hands as she flipped through its damning contents. Photographs of her mother meeting Ethan at the cabana, receipts for lavish dinners paid in cash, and text messages carefully transcribed from Karen's meticulous snooping. Eliana's breath hitched as she spotted the final page. A copy of a signed rental agreement for a condo in Brickell, a condo in Maria's name. This isn't just an affair, Karen said, her voice low. Maria's been preparing for something bigger. What does that mean? Eliana asked, her voice breaking. Karen hesitated before answering. It means she wasn't just toying with your husband. She was building an escape plan, Eliana, one that didn't involve you. Eliana stared at the rental agreement, her mind spinning. Her mother had not only betrayed her, but had calculated every step of her downfall. I had to tell you, Karen added. For all her threats, she couldn't keep this hidden forever. A confrontation at dawn. As the sun rose over Miami, Eliana stormed into Maria's bedroom at the beach house, the folder clutched tightly in her hands. Maria was sitting by the window, sipping coffee as if she hadn't just detonated her daughter's life. Couldn't sleep, darling? Maria asked coolly without turning around. Don't you dare, darling me, Eliana snapped, throwing the folder onto the bed. Explain this. Maria's eyes flicked to the folder, her expression unreadable. She took a deliberate sip of her coffee before setting it down. I see Karen's been busy. You're not even denying it, Eliana said, her voice trembling with rage. The condo, the money, the lies. You were planning to leave, weren't you? Leave me, leave this family. What, with Ethan? Maria stood, her silk robe billowing around her as she walked toward her daughter. Oh, Eliana, don't be so naive. This isn't about leaving. It's about survival. Survival? Eliana spat. You destroyed everything I had. No, darling, Maria said sharply. Ethan destroyed everything you had. I just helped him along. The words hit Eliana like a physical blow. You're sick, she whispered, stepping back. Maria's expression softened, almost pitying. You think this world is fair, Eliana? That love conquers all? I've lived long enough to know better. Ethan came to me, weak and vulnerable. I didn't take him from you. He gave himself to me. Eliana shook her head, tears streaming down her face. You're not my mother. You're a monster. Maria's gaze hardened. And yet, you're still here, still listening. Why? Because part of you knows I'm right. Eliana stared at her mother, the woman who had once been her role model, now unrecognizable. No, she said firmly. You're wrong. About everything. Maria raised an eyebrow. And what are you going to do about it, Eliana? Eliana's jaw tightened. Watch me. Ethan's role. Eliana found Ethan packing a suitcase in their bedroom. He looked up as she entered, guilt and fear etched into his face. Eliana, save it, she said coldly, throwing the folder onto the bed beside him. You think you're walking away from this unscathed? Think again. Ethan's eyes darted to the folder, widening as he realized what it contained. Where did you get this? It doesn't matter, Eliana said. What matters is what happens next. You're going to tell me everything, Ethan. Every lie, every secret, or I'll make sure Maria's escape plan drags you down with her. Ethan sank onto the bed, his hands trembling. I didn't want this to happen, he murmured. But it did, Eliana said, her voice cold. Now start talking. Ethan exhaled shakily. Maria approached me first. She said she understood me in a way you didn't. That she could help me, help us, get back on track. And you believed her? Eliana asked, incredulous. I was weak, Ethan admitted. And she knew exactly how to manipulate me. Eliana's stomach churned. And the condo? The money? She told me it was for us, Ethan said, his voice breaking, that we'd leave Miami, start fresh somewhere else. But it was all lies. She played me, Eliana, just like she played you. Eliana's jaw tightened. You deserve each other. The final plan. Eliana didn't sleep that night. Instead, she sat in the living room, piecing together a plan. If Maria thought she could manipulate her way out of this, she was sorely mistaken. The next morning, Eliana called Karen. Are you ready to help me end this? She asked. Karen hesitated before replying. What do you need? Eliana's plan was simple but devastating. She would expose Maria's machinations in front of the people who mattered most, her friends, her social circle, and the community that adored her. Using the contents of Karen's folder, Eliana organized a small, family dinner at the beach house, inviting a few key figures Maria had worked hard to impress over the years. As the evening unfolded, Eliana played the perfect host, watching as Maria basked in the glow of compliments and admiration. Then, as dessert was served, Eliana stood, raising her glass. A toast, she said, her voice steady. To family. The guests raised their glasses, smiling. And to the truth, Eliana added, setting her glass down. The room fell silent. Eliana, Maria said, her voice warning. No, Mom, Eliana interrupted. It's my turn now. She opened the folder and began reading aloud. Texts, receipts, and photos, each revelation landing like a hammer blow. Maria's face drained of color as the room erupted into gasps and murmurs. You thought you could manipulate us all, Eliana said, her voice shaking with emotion. But not anymore. A shattered legacy. By the end of the evening, Maria's carefully constructed world lay in ruins. Her friends left in disgust, her reputation irreparably damaged. Eliana stood in the wreckage of the dinner party, her heart heavy but resolute. You'll regret this, Maria hissed as she walked out the door. I already regret ever trusting you, Eliana replied, her voice firm. Epilogue. In the months that followed, Eliana rebuilt her life, cutting ties with Maria and finalizing her divorce from Ethan. It wasn't easy, but she found strength in herself she never knew she had. Maria disappeared from Miami, her name whispered only in hushed tones, while Ethan faded into obscurity. Eliana, however, thrived. For the first time in years, she felt free to live, to heal, and to reclaim her happiness.